Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned, I just want to give my background. I come from Intergovernmental Organization, so it's the 10 member states of Southeast Asia. And basically, I'm going to talk from my perspective. I know that all of us talk about mainstreaming. When you talk about mainstreaming, of course, the first target is policymakers, whether at the national level or regional level. But I think from our perspective, sometimes we look at things differently. In the opening statements yesterday, we heard from the minister from Samoa. Their message is very clear, it's very good, very upfront. Talk less and do more. In ASEAN, we have 10 ministers. So I have 10 ministers telling me the same thing as a secretariat. I hear so much about funding, so much about conferences, so much about seminars and so on. What have we brought to ASEAN? So they are looking for deliverables, of course, there's a need for this kind of conferences, networking, and so on. At the same time, we should make sure that whatever we discuss here actually makes an impact to the people who matter. And yesterday, I think of course, this is an adaptation forum, and we need to focus on adaptation. But then again, we shouldn't lose sight that adaptation is one component of, for example, the climate change. And the climate change is one component of the whole environment debate. And the whole environment is just one component of the Sustainable Development Framework. So we shouldn't be talking about adaptation as the thing that we have to put it up front. We shouldn't look at adaptation as something as a new field. We have heard of adaptation yesterday. You're talking about adaptation science. Someone said we know little about adaptation. I think all these are good for academic discourse. But I think if we look at ourselves, if we look at what we have been doing, I think we have done a lot on adaptation. The only problem is we are not practicing it. The provocateur, I think, rightly pointed out in his 5 points. He said, look at the different levels, the local levels. They are doing a lot. Let us learn from them. First thing, let us learn from them, not teach them from our perspective. We have not been working at the local level. And let us guide those people, give them the resources to upscale it, to make it better. Communicate that to the policymakers so that the policies they make are actually informed with policy choices. So I think the few points that he has made, I think is telling to us, rather than just going on an academic debate and having a debate of what is adaptation, what is mitigation, and so on. As I said, at the regional level, this thing about, of course, we talk about climate change, adaptation, and all that. We do talk, but that's all. What we do discuss is actual programs and projects. We have the dangerous trend now of actually losing track of the substantive programs because we are caught up with this global debate about climate change, north-south funding, and so on. This morning, I made a comment about why we are focusing so much on adaptation, or rather why we are not looking at many other issues. And somebody just told me during coffee break, because that's where the money is now. And I think if you ask all of us realistically, that is true. Of course, that is a practical point, that's a realistic point, but it is up to us to then make sure that whatever money is available, we tailor it back to what we need to do. Now, looking at ASEAN, we, of course, have national governments, they have national programs, they have the national activities. We have the ASEAN Secretariat. And we are very careful in making sure that what the regional level actions are actually supports, not duplicates what the national governments are doing. And we find our niche in terms of issues where countries have a common interest. We can help the countries to better themselves through regional cooperation, through local learning, and so on. And based on that, in fact, we restructured our areas of cooperation, even after WSSD, into 10 areas, which I'll go into detail later on. And we have been religiously sticking to that. Of course, now we have created a separate platform for climate change. And we don't go into debates about what is mitigation, what is adaptation, and as I said earlier, everything is interrelated. It's the same, two sides of the same coin, and so on. Just to give some examples on the activities that we are doing, for example, of course, it's the news now that there are forest fires in the region, there's transboundary haze. It is not just from one particular country or something. In fact, in the northern part of ASEAN, which I think most people don't know, there are more hotspots, that means more fires compared to the southern part. And this is a phenomenon we faced, unfortunately, not only certain times of the year, because from July to October, it is in the southern part, and then the dry season is coming in the northern part. So it is a problem. And if you look at forest fires, it is just carbon burning. It is peatlands. It is just carbon burning. It's going into the atmosphere. It is a loss of biodiversity. It is affecting poverty, the people living there and so on. It's a very big problem. But we have a lot of scientists and academics spending a lot of time on calculating how much carbon is being emitted, so these countries are irresponsible and so on. At the same time, we don't find that kind of enthusiasm in helping us. Of course, it's the government's responsibility to put in place that things to do, but we don't find that same enthusiasm coming in. And we talk so much about capacity building and so on. For example, under the haze, we have the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. I think UNEP has said this is one of the most current and comprehensive treaty on transboundary haze pollution. Critics say that yes, you have this haze agreement 10 years, but still why is a forest fire occurring? It's the same question you can ask the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol. We have this for how many years, and why is it climate change is still a problem? It is a problem because of the connectedness. Another example I can give you is the disaster management. I think we are the only region in the world which have a legally binding agreement, which is most comprehensive, which is based on the Hyogo framework. And if you look at the disaster management agreement, it talks about prevention, mitigation, disaster risk, and so on. Now, we have to work and support those things. Adaptation will find a place there. I'm sure you will have adaptation activities, you just have to label it. Mitigation will be there. Climate change is there, So rather than working in terms of this climate change issues, we have to work on the real issues that affects the people on the ground, and everything else will fall in place. Similarly, I've just mentioned two examples. We have a program on sustainable cities, we have a program on coastal and marine environment, and so on. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, we would like to have more support for these programs. If you want whatever you're doing at the political level, at the ministerial level, if you want your activities to be recognized, you can come to us. I mean, the ministers are meeting every year. The senior officials are meeting every year. The technical officers are meeting every year. And this is what we can bring to whoever is working on this field. We are not good at working with the grassroots level. For that, we need to link up with the NGOs and so on, and which we are doing. We are not good at making policy analysis and so on. Like you mentioned, if we have to make sure that the triangle, this broken triangle of policy, science, and so on, we can provide the linkage, for that mutual interaction. As the science is being developed for policy, then you have a constant interaction. So basically what I'm saying is, when we talk about, to conclude, when you talk about capacity building, capacity needs for mainstreaming, please avoid the traditional approach we have been taking. I can see that once you do this, yes, we need to do a needs assessment. We need to come up with a matrix of best practices, and then we need to do this and do that, As I said, as a provocateur said, everything is there. It is all for us to open our eyes, our ears, and mainstream that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raman, for that very interesting and important remarks, especially on the importance of continuing what you are doing, the special need of the practical applications, and also to take up what we have on the ground and build on that. Now we have the final speaker, the combined wisdom of UNDP and WRI. Peter, please.
Oh, Lord help us. Okay. Well, I would like to focus in particular on the last question that was posed at the beginning, and partly by way of summary and partly as a lead-in to our discussion, just take a step back for a moment and unpack this concept of mainstreaming, which you heard a bit about this morning, and then focus on one key dimension, at least from my perspective, one key dimension and often neglected dimension of mainstreaming, which I think also gets to many of the points raised earlier today and yesterday. Mainstreaming, this is a very big and encompassing term, and I think it is important to unpack it, especially as we think about capacity needs in relation to actually doing mainstreaming. And I'd like to highlight three key dimensions of mainstreaming. And again, we heard some of this in particular from Charles this morning, Charles Earhart. One, it very clearly has to be multi-level. There is a tendency with discussions around mainstreaming to focus at the national level, and often for good reason. But to be effective, it has to be multi-level. It has to happen at the local level, the meso level, the national level, and importantly also at the international level. Second, and we've heard a lot about this yesterday and this morning, it clearly has to be multi-sectoral in character, especially when addressing a multi-sectoral issue such as adaptation. And thirdly, and we've heard a bit about this, perhaps not quite enough, it also, I think, clearly has to be multi-stakeholder in nature. To be effective, mainstreaming has to address a diverse range of perspectives, and sometimes often diverging perspectives, both on mainstreaming itself and on the subject of mainstreaming, whether it's adaptation, gender, environment, whatever it might be. And I think these dimensions of mainstreaming have some important implications for the actual doing of mainstreaming, and again, thinking about capacity needs. And I'll just again highlight three, not exclusive considerations, but three I think that are particularly important. One is, mainstreaming is necessarily very process-oriented, but at the end of the day, it has to be outcome-driven to be effective. It's not about process at the end of the day. It's about achieving better development and environment outcomes on the ground. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that in talking about mainstreaming. Secondly, it's as much, and I think often perhaps even more, a political and institutional change process as much as it is a technical process. And that is not at all to downplay the technical side of mainstreaming, because I think that is important. But more fundamentally, it's about policy and institutional change. It's about trying to achieve systemic change. And then thirdly, it is necessarily a continuing and longer term process. You're not going to achieve mainstreaming through a one-off project.
That's right.
You know, okay, we've got the requisite paragraph on adaptation in the National Development Strategy. Job done. We've mainstreamed adaptation. No. It has to be much more a longer term process. And this is where capacity becomes critical. So again, it's a very big term, it's a very encompassing term, but I would like to now zero in on what I think is really a key challenge for mainstreaming and for thinking about capacity needs. And we've heard about this in various forms over the last day and a half, and that's this challenge of scaling up, which again I think is particularly important in the context of adaptation. How do we scale up what works, what is working at the local level? As we've heard quite a bit about, adaptation in many respects is about local level learning. So as adaptation moves forward, it really is in many respects going to be about how do we foster local level learning and how do we more effectively capture and share local level learning. So to me, this is a key feature of mainstreaming. And in my view, a key mainstreaming and a key capacity challenge with respect to mainstreaming, and in the context of adaptation, perhaps really the most important challenge, is how do we more effectively link up local level experience, local level learning, with higher level mainstreaming. In other words, how do we make mainstreaming more responsive and more driven by local level learning, by local solutions, things that work, and by locally defined needs? So to me, this really is sort of the crux of the challenge. And in terms of capacity needs,